The AirPods you're wearing right now were probably made in Vietnam. So was your Samsung phone and your Nike trainers. Vietnam went from one of the world's poorest countries to a global manufacturing hub in less than 20 years, and most people have no idea it happened. For decades, the global supply chain relied on a single, highly efficient blueprint: make it in China. But eventually, that model began to crack. Rising Chinese labor costs made baseline assembly far more expensive. Then, abrupt geopolitical tariffs slapped massive premiums on exports, and a series of severe supply chain shocks proved that relying on a single country was a massive corporate liability. Corporate boards panicked. Almost overnight, multinational conglomerates issued a new mandate known as China Plus One. The directive was simple: find, fund, and build a de-risked secondary manufacturing hub somewhere else in Asia. This sudden geographic shift created a multi-trillion-dollar vacuum. Developing nations were instantly locked in a winner-take-all race to capture the largest reallocation of manufacturing capital in modern history. In the 1980s and 90s, Vietnam was largely agrarian and ranked as one of the world's poorest nations. Before the sweeping economic reforms known as Doi Moi, it had almost no industrial footprint to attract foreign cash. Fast forward to 2023, and the nation's GDP per capita sits at nearly $4,500. That is a massive leap from the roughly $700 it hovered around back in 1986. This chart tracks extreme poverty in Vietnam between 2010 and 2023. You can see the rate plummet from 14% down to under 4%, pulling millions of people into the middle class in a single generation. This growth reflects a transformation that moved faster than natural recovery alone. To understand how a nation can pivot this quickly, we have to look at the specific competitive advantages built into the country's economic policy. When conglomerates decide where to move billions in assets, they look at a highly specific site selection matrix. They need to check three major boxes: labor, trade, and logistics. To satisfy the labor requirement, Vietnam leveraged a young, growing demographic and made heavy investments in education. Today, World Bank data shows its workforce holds the highest human capital index among lower middle-income countries. The average Vietnamese student completes 10.2 learning-adjusted years of schooling, creating a deeply capable, literate labor pool ready for complex assembly tasks. Next was trade. The government aggressively negotiated 16 different free trade agreements, linking the country to major markets across the globe and slashing export tariffs to near zero. This bar chart compares trade volume to overall economic output. Vietnam's bar shoots up to a massive trade-to-GDP ratio of nearly 170%. It is now one of the most open, export-oriented economies on Earth. By systematically eliminating friction for foreign capital and providing a highly trained workforce, Vietnam handed corporate boards a financial equation that was simply impossible to ignore. That leaves logistics. And here, Vietnam held an irreplaceable geographic advantage over every other country competing for the China Plus One money: a direct land border with China's manufacturing heartland. Rather than building a component supply chain from scratch, corporations could source their parts from existing Chinese networks, truck them directly across the border overnight, and complete final assembly in Vietnamese industrial parks. Once those goods are assembled, they are immediately shipped out. The sheer volume of finished electronics and apparel leaving these coastal ports for Western markets is staggering. Geography gave them a head start, but the rapid construction of highway and port infrastructure turned the country into a locked-in, heavily integrated node in the global supply chain. The physical results of this engineered economy are highly visible. The world's largest tech and apparel giants moved in and scaled up quickly. Take Samsung. Their localized footprint has grown so massive that 25% of all Samsung smartphones sold globally are now produced within Vietnam's borders. The assembly lines have also evolved toward higher-end tech. Companies like LG and Intel have invested heavily in local electronics assembly and complex chip testing facilities. This migration spans multiple sectors. Traditional apparel giants like Nike have deeply embedded their own supply chains into these local industrial parks. The macroeconomic scoreboard reflects this influx of capital. Asian Development Bank data projects robust GDP growth for the country of 7.2% in 2026 and another 7.0% in 2027. These deep, long-term commitments from companies like Apple, Samsung, and Nike show how the country has embedded itself into the world's most complex supply chains. But this momentum is accelerating toward a new threat, the middle income trap. This is the stage where a developing nation loses its competitive edge in cheap labor long before it can compete in high-value innovation. The economic math going forward is unforgiving. To reach its stated goal of achieving high income status by 2045, Vietnam must sustain a 6% average annual growth rate for 2 straight decades. Achieving that means flying directly into 3 looming headwinds: sudden global trade shifts, the rapid automation of assembly lines, and a rapidly aging workforce. Vietnam's next decade depends on a transition. To sustain its trajectory and reach high income status, the nation must now attempt to move from large-scale assembly to high-value research and design.